I want to
morning.
extend my welcome to you also. It's good seeing you here at APA.
Good to be here.
It's my distinct honor and pleasure to serve as moderator for this event. Each of our honorees has been transformative through the leadership they have shown in their respective professional careers. Dr. Allen is the first woman psychologist and alumna to serve as president of Lincoln University, my alma mater. And Dr. Malone is the first African-American woman psychologist to serve as CEO of the National League for Nursing. And Dr. Daniel is my new president, first African-American woman elected to serve as the president of the American Psychological Association. So just please join me in congratulating them again. So at this point, I get to ask them some questions. And we see the accomplished women sitting before you now, as they are now. But what kind of child were you growing up? Shy, adventurous, outgoing, curious? Who'd like to start?
Sneaky.
Okay. Well, we'll start with you, Dr. Allen.
So that's what everyone says. So if you see pictures of me as a little girl, you know, never looked as if I never got in trouble. But if you looked at my smile and that smirk on my face, I always got away with whatever I did. But I'm the baby in the family, so that helps as well. But I think the best descriptor would be curious. And so, you know, from an early age, I always wanted to know how things worked and operated. And I think that really was why I was so attracted to psychology. When I learned you can actually put the world into a 2x2 table and sort of figure something out, it just sort of really fit with my personality.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's next?
Oh, I was quiet and shy. But I was the one who couldn't do things right because right was cleaning houses, and I was not a cleaner. So I was the one who was not adept at what I needed to do to get on in the world, so they would just let me go with finding a book and climbing a tree and reading. And I did love that. But I was also the one who I was the oldest. You were the youngest, I was the oldest, so I took care of everybody in the family. And I think that had a lot to do with wanting to do something with my hands, wanting to be hands-on. And I went into clinical psychology because I could put my hands on the clinical practice. I loved that.
Well, it's interesting because I'm the middle of three girls. And so the story that they like to tell about me was when I was a little girl and growing up in San Antonio, Texas. My dad was military, but both parents were born there or close by. And my mother, and we lived in a housing project, organized a program of busing, their own individual busing, it was a carpooling over to the Catholic schools because the Catholic schools taught you how to read, as opposed to playing in kindergarten. And the story is that every year they'd have all the Catholic schools come together in an outdoor arena in San Antonio. And in those days, the nuns wore the more traditional outfits. And at age 5, I went up to the nun and I told her she needed to take all that stuff off or she was going to faint. And whereupon she told me to take myself back to my seat. And of course, she did. She fainted. But she did have a sense of humor and told my mother that I was caring rather than naughty to have suggested that she take all that stuff off. So I guess I started being somewhat caring when I was in kindergarten, even though it was a little inappropriate.
Wonderful. Well, we have to rethink our theory about birth order. Okay. All right. So what made you choose psychology for your career path? Was there an experience that led you to become interested?
I'll start. I was a nurse, and I am a nurse, clinical, and I was in psychiatric nursing, so I had my master's degree already from Rutgers in psych. But I wanted to get my doctorate because one of my mentors had said that I needed a doctorate, and it was getting late. I'm from Kentucky, and so I was 20-something, and I figured I'd better have a doctorate by the time I'm 30 or something's wrong with me. So I looked around. I had a daughter who was 2 years old, and I said, well, let me look around and see what's available to get my doctorate, and I found that there were no programs that really put your hands on folks. I mean, you talked to people, you worked with people. I loved being a psychologist, that kind of one-to-one and groups and family therapy kind of stuff. So the only thing that was available to me was available in the clinical psychology department. And I remember going to to them, and they had a lot of people applying for the program, and there was, they had never had a nurse in the program. So I remember arguing with the chief of the department about Freud versus Sullivan in terms of theory, because I was Sullivanian and he was Freudian, and I thought there may be other reasons besides ego and id and all of that, and I liked Sullivan. So I argued with him the entire interview. And I figured I was not going to get in. I mean, that is not the approach. And so I said, in all likelihood, I am not going to be admitted. And I was married, and I had one child who was 2, and so I did what everybody does. I got pregnant, and I had another baby. So 2 weeks before I started school, my little boy was born. And I remember that I got both of my wishes. I got my son, and I was admitted to the psychology program. And it was the hardest thing in the world to have 2 babies and to be going into a doctoral program where you're 24, 25, and everybody else is 18 and 19, and you feel so old. But I loved it, and I really, really did enjoy it.
Well, my story is a little different. I graduated from a historical black college down in North Carolina. And back in the mid-'60s, University of Illinois and University of Michigan were coming down to the black colleges in North Carolina to recruit graduate students. And the person who landed at Fayetteville State was a psychology person. I was a history undergraduate major. And they persuaded me that I could catch up and go to graduate school in psychology, and I believed them, and off I went. And so I actually did fine and finished the program, but that's the true story. They're saying we want to have more, well, in those days we were colored and Negroes, in our graduate programs, and you're smart, and you'll be smart enough to catch up. So that's how I got into psychology, and I've been in it for some time now. But that's the story.
Okay.
That's great. So I've told this story quite a bit because it's really it's fundamental to how it developed. But I became interested in psychology actually in high school. Took an AP course in psychology, and like I said, it was great. Learning about Skinner and Piaget, and the whole thing about 2x2 tables and so on. It just really excited me. So I really loved the subject matter, and was always happy to go to that class. And then one day we were studying intelligence, and I had a white professor, and she told us that African Americans were inferior to whites, that it was a fact, right? A fact. So I pushed and challenged as one should, but it just didn't sit right to me, So we were reading Jensen, 69, and she showed us all that data. But here I am. I'm in a large inner city high school. We were mostly people of color, black and Latinos. The whites had fled the high school after race riots before I first got there. So we were all over. We were in the remedial classes, we were in the regular classes. Here I am sitting in an AP class. So it just really didn't make sense to me. But when I went on to college at Lincoln, I knew I wanted to be a psychology major, and really knew I wanted to understand why she had said that. And at Lincoln, which was really great in terms of tuning me into methodology and statistics and really understanding research, I started to get somewhat of an insight. But my senior year there, I read a book, Even the Rat Was White, by Arthur Guthrie. And, I read through all of that, and my professor then, said, well, what do you think about that? And I'm like, I can't believe they used to do stuff like that to black people. So So he looked at me like, used to? Where is this girl from? Because, you know, it was all about the sterilization movement and all that kind of stuff. And I had just not connected all the things I thought I was curious about. And so, you know, he just looked at me and just said, you know, we need to put more time and energy. He was actually the professor that got me into Howard. He had been a Howard grad, and he called down, Dr. Hicks was chair then, and he was like, y'all need to take her, because if she goes back home, we won't find her ever again. So I went on into graduate school, was fortunate enough to meet people like Dr. Harrell, who's sitting right there, and Wade Boykin, who became my mentor. And through that experience and all the things I learned as a graduate student at Howard, I came to understand more about why the teacher had said that, and, you know, came to understand that, you know, research never proves anything. So facts are not necessarily what we do, but we just find evidence that's consistent or inconsistent with an idea, and that if you sort of change the question and change the methodology, you can also find data that might support another. And what matters is whether or not what you find has an impact on the human condition. And so it was really through sort of an adversive kind of a situation that really led me really into the discipline. And I am very grateful that through my education at Lincoln and Howard, I was really able to turn that experience into what became my area of research till this day. So it's a good story and a bad story, but it sort of brought me where I am today.
Right. And your story leads me to my next question was, how have you experienced racism and sexism, and how do you handle it?
I'm gonna let the middle child go first.
And when the middle child read that, I thought, oh boy, how honest should I be about racism and sexism? I finished my doctorate in '69 at Illinois and was involved in Head Start and follow through. We had a grant to service some 16 communities around the country. And I remember going to one of them in the South, which was serving primarily a Mexican-American population. And the superintendent of schools telling me bluntly, lady, if you come here causing trouble with these parents, we can shut down the school. And my not wanting the kids to be deprived of this, trying to figure out what to do and how to manage that. In another community where it was predominantly white in another southern state, which I won't name, the superintendent told me, in this town, we have an understanding about who's who, even though we're all white. So don't come here confusing these white children who don't belong in some class to think they belong in another class. I said, okay. So I have a reputation for activating people. And so it was really, that was a tough thing to do, to work in all these communities and not being able to mobilize people to make a difference for their children because they would pull the program. It wasn't a threat, it was, as my mother would say, a promise. And so that was my introduction to that harshness. By the way, I was raised in a military family, and that's had an impact on me. We started in Northern California, where my sister and I integrated a school, 2 black kids there, and they did nothing. We were physically assaulted. My sister issued 2 black eyes in one day, and that ended the assaults. And then we went to Bermuda, where we had, we were with black kids, but we were different because they were British born. And then we went to Hawaii, 2 black girls in a Japanese high school. I mean, we've just done this, just sort of being alone business, and that's been my life in many ways. But that Head Start follow-through experience just haunts me because I don't know if I did the right thing. I've stood up for my students and for myself in the past over these years. That's how I got into mentoring. I did not want them to have the experiences that I had, so I took risk and stood up to people and asked them not to behave in ways they'd behaved in the past. And it doesn't make you popular, but the students appreciate it. I figured that studying psychology is tough enough without being oppressed. So I've made some risky decisions along the way around that. And I know that things have happened to me. When people read about my first, those are hard-earned first. I'm not going to tell you that it was easy, but I stuck in where I've been now for some 45 years. yes, I came when I was 2 to help you with the math. That it has not been easy. But I'm really determined that in my few years there left that I want to have students of color in those programs, because if you go through those programs, it open doors for you that they will not be open in other places. So I just have to that's kind of my striving in many ways, but just to tell you that I've closed my mouth in times when I didn't want to close it, but thinking about the greater good. At some point, it's a call, and unfortunately, because when I earned my degree, I didn't have a collective group of other people of color to talk to, because you're the first means you're by yourself. You're talking to yourself. Now I do have a network of people I can talk with, and that makes a big difference, and I'm truly grateful for it.
Thanks for your candor on that. Would either of you like to answer that question?
After you?
So I'm quite sure sexism has impacted me. And as I thought about that, I really couldn't really think of anything directly except, I've been up for different positions and not chosen. And when I see the man and I look at my experiences and accomplishments versus theirs, that's the reason I come to. But, you're going to always be your own self-advocate. But, I think one of the things that's important, and I've been a chief diversity officer. I was chief diversity officer at 2 institutions. So for about 10 years of my life, one of my greatest passions was to really try to bring people together across difference. And the thing I learned is that, every situation is different, and every person is different. Sometimes you just have to be generous, because you just have to understand, as my mama would say, you got to charge it to people's knowledge. If they don't know any better, then how can they do any better? And what all the literature says is, if you're really going to invest in it, if you try to build a relationship with that person, if you care enough about moving them on, then, through that relationship, you can come to move people in all kind of directions around beliefs. And then there are times where you just have to say what you need to say and keep it moving. And so I think that, the short answer is, for me, it always depends. Sometimes I think there are people in situations that where you have to stop and be a little patient, especially if these are going to be people who are going to be in your environment and impact you. And so you just have to figure out how to mold that relationship and those interactions so that you each can move along, because I think we all learn something. And then there are other times when, this ain't worth my time. And then there are other times when you just got to get it out and just keep on going. So context, to me, it always drives my response.
I was born in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, a segregated little city, town. So I had plenty of it. But I'll use the one when I was older, and I was in my psychology program, and I was taking my quals. And I had done very well in the program. I was moving along real at a clippity-clop kind of pace. And then they called me in to say that I had responded to a test question, and they were embarrassed, ashamed, and they were upset that I would answer it in the way that I did. The question had to do with a new current issue and what does the literature say about it? Well, I chose, and I don't recommend this, I chose black men in emergency rooms who are more frequently hospitalized for psychosis and treated not so well compared to white men. And I wrote about that, and I put all the documentation there, and my university was so upset with me, and they were trying to decide whether they would pass me or not in terms of my qualification exams. And it was really, they said, is anybody here doing that? I mean, they called me in and they asked me, are you talking about, is there any reality to it that you're experiencing here? And I said, well, I'm sure there must be some reality to it. The data show, and which hurt their feelings something horribly. And so that was one. And I think that I've always chosen to push against the system, especially when I think it's just totally wrong. And that works for me sometimes. and that works against me sometimes. And so I have to watch myself that I just don't rage at the inappropriate time, because as my family told me, they had something I wanted, my doctorate. And I was in a position of trying to reach for it, and they had the power to say no or yes. It's not a good place to be leveraging and teaching people about the newest current issue. So, but they passed me. And I think now they're really happy they did. But that was it.
Thank you. Thank you. So, who has inspired you? Who are your role models and why?
No, the middle one went first.
Do you want to go first this time?
I have so many. I always start with my parents, who were not fortunate enough to have people invest in higher education. And so, when I decided I wanted to go off to college and then go off to graduate school, they sunk everything into that. And so I try to model that life as I try to give back in a way that they gave so much to me. But, coming through higher education, I've had mentors. It's always somebody in my life that steps in and tries to help me see that I'm better than what I think I am, and that I need to really think about how to make use of that, or not to underuse that. So as an undergrad, I was, don't tell anybody, doing my undergrad thing, and professors were like, really, come on, you need to get in here and stick to that. Then going to Howard, I looked at professors and so on. I didn't grow up knowing anything about academia, but those guys, and they were mostly guys, pushed me and again, put me in places that I never thought that I would actually achieve. But, my biggest role model for administration and higher education by far is President Ruth Simmons. She became the first African-American woman to head a Ivy League college when I was on the tenure track at Smith College. And she came in, she did a wonderful job, but she invested in me like nobody's business. And so when she came to understand, when I saw her as a president, I was like, I think I'd like to do that. And I would like to do that at Lincoln University, where I went. And from that day on, she just gave me opportunity. She opened a door, and if I was able to move to the next step, she'd open another door. And so, having people who invest in you is really very important, but watching the way that she managed all the things she had to manage. I often say, I just went through board meetings this past weekend, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm gonna channel the best of Ruth that I can to sort of get through this, because she showed me so many ways to do administration, to really try to figure out the best strategy and so on. And so I just credit her with this, having shown me how a Black woman could persevere in almost any situation. And I made a decision to not stay in that Ivy League sort of elite environment. I wanted to be back in an HBCU place. And when I made that decision, and everybody else said, well, why in the world, with the career that you're having, would you want to do that? She stood up and she supported me, and supported my way getting back out of that world and back into the HBCU environment that I really wanted to be. And some people would not have done that, haven't had invested that much in me, where my trajectory could have been someplace else. And so I admire her, and she continues to be a great role model for me.
I'll go next. Ed, would you please raise your hand, just so everybody knows? Thank you so much. That's one of my mentors right there. And yeah, and I've had male, female, Black, white, all kind of mentors. I think every part of me has been mentored. Every goal that I have a bouquet of mentors. One of the ones who is probably knocked my head up against the wall on a regular basis was Dr. Hattie Besant. And she was a nurse, but she was also a psychiatric nurse, and her degree was in something other than nursing. And I think that a lot of my mentors have had their, although they might have been a nurse, their degrees were in something other than nursing. And she was just always there. She was scheming for me when I wasn't scheming for myself. And she would tell me to do things that I thought were really strange and bizarre. Mentors do that. Mm-hmm. And I would just do it. Like, she told me to call the head of the Royal College of Nursing, who was stepping down, and ask her if she thought they would hire an American for the post. And I said, but why? And she told me, just do it. And so I did. And I asked Christine, do you think they'd hire an American for the post? She said, absolutely not. She said, they don't hire anybody but Brits. They only hire, they've never hired anybody but Brits. And they don't hire Welsh, Scots, Irish. Nobody but Brits do they hire for this position. So I got off the phone and I thought, what a wonderful time to apply. If I got the position, they'd say, wow, Bev Malone got that post. If I didn't get it, they'd say, they only hire Brits. So I applied for it, and I got the post overseas, and I went over there for about 6 years. So my mentors have just seen things that I couldn't see. They see pathways, and I've collected just a really wonderful group of mentors. And I figured out that mentoring is about somebody who can open a door that you cannot open, that you may not even see. And what you want to be, a mentor is not just who you are. A mentor is about what you're trying to be, where you're striving. My dissertation was on mentoring. Mm-hmm. So, it's just part of who I am, and I try to give back. I'm just not sure that I ever give back enough, considering how much was given to me.
It's interesting because I became a mentor because I had so very few mentors, but I had role models, people who came into my life and really had an impact. So when I was in elementary school in Bermuda, my principal earned his doctorate at Harvard in education, and this is back in the day. We all came back to school that night. They had a candlelight ceremony, they did that, and Dr. Robinson was hooded by the people who came over from Harvard. I never heard of anyone becoming a doctor without being an MD. Mm-hmm. I was in the 5th grade in Bermuda, and my parents were highly educated at that point. My mother actually, before she died, insisted that we take a trip to Bermuda so I could tell Dr. Robinson that I earned my doctorate because of him. And he says to her, she's the only one who was present that night who did it. And he was so grateful and so hugged me, and I was so undone because I figured that a whole lot of people were impacted and they would receive doctorates. He said, you're the only one. Mother said, see, you're supposed to go and thank people even though they didn't know they had an impact on you. So when I was at this college in North Carolina, wasn't really a mentor, but someone who really believed in me. And sometimes you just need somebody to believe that you're smart and you can do things. And then when I hit Illinois, because there were so few black students there in the graduate program at the School of Education, my advisor would say to me, I think you need to rethink what you're doing, which was his clue I shouldn't take a class with that person. And so I managed to avoid taking classes that were really going to be pretty difficult for me. And how I came to be the 3rd black woman appointed to Harvard Medical School in the 70s was because these 2 guys decided, who were very influential at Harvard Medical School, that they thought I could cut it. Mm-hmm. And so they got me appointed. Now, I didn't know that until they were both deceased to thank them for what they'd done. I'd assumed that there were other lots of black women who had been appointed before me, but that wasn't true at all. And that's one of my regrets, is that I didn't understand what they did, the risk that they took to have me appointed to the medical school. So people can mentor you, not directly, but open doors for you that you don't even understand what doors they're opening for you. That's a regret that I have. So I've spent my life mentoring. What's happened here at APA, to be honest with you, is that people have been encouraging to me and have suggested that I consider doing things that I didn't think I wanted to do or should do. And that's how I arrived where I am today. Kind words telling people I believe in you, or maybe not necessarily making a way or ways that people have mentored me. I'm pretty headstrong and determined once I get on the pathway. You don't have to keep me on the pathway. I'm pretty clear about being there. But yes, I've been in so many situations where I'm the first and the only, and that's been really hard. And I think that I owe a lot to people who, in quiet ways, supported me, but couldn't overtly do it. And for them, when I retire, which is coming sooner than later, I will go around and personally thank them, because I know that being openly supportive may have been at a price. Because people say, you do things nobody else would think about doing in this place. And I do them, not for the sake of doing them, but because I know it will make a difference in some ways. So to the young people here today, I want to say that often people in your corner, you don't know it, but if you hear about it, go and thank them. And they may be doing it not in an overt way, in a covert way, that to just say, I believe in that person, and their belief in you, even though they haven't said it to you, will open doors for you. And that's what's happened to me in my career.
Thank you. So could you share maybe 3 of the most important lessons you've learned that have kept you productive, effective, and fulfilled?
You're looking at me?
I'm looking at all of
I'm
you.
good, okay.
yeah,
Then I'm going to sit back.
But you want a little break? You spoke last, but we can
Oh,
start
sure,
with somebody else.
sure. No, I don't mind.
Dr. Malone?
I have these sayings. I'm from Kentucky, and I grew up with everybody having sayings, and so they kind of seeped into my very being. It's a cinch by the inch, it's hard by the yard. Yeah, so sometimes you have to just take a little bite, inch along, have a party, inch along, have a party, to get through. And your dissertation is probably one of those cinch by the inch kind of things. Your doctoral program, cinching by the inch. But a lot of life, a lot of development is about understanding you don't have to do it all at one time. You don't have to swallow the whole thing whole. You can actually bite off a piece. Think about it. I pray about it. Think about it. Bite off another piece. So that's one of the things, Lula. Another one is, I got this one from church. Don't let anyone take your joy from you. They didn't give it to you, and they cannot take it away. So I just believe in that wholeheartedly. I just refuse to allow anybody to take my joy. It's mine. You cannot have it. I'm sorry, you would like it, but you cannot. And that helps me a lot of times get through a lot of different things. And then just take cannot out of your vocabulary. It shouldn't be there. It doesn't have to be there. Cannot is useless. It's about really what you do and what you don't even know you can do. And it's about those mentors who prepare away from you and they say, that's a wall and that's a door. Step over to the left, open the door, you can get through. Some people can't distinguish between walls and doors, and mentors can do that. They know the difference between a wall and a door. So those are 3 of mine. But I have a whole slew, because I'm getting older, and the longer I live, the more I get. And I love that way of looking at life. It kind of helps me paddle along.
I'm going to remember those 3. Okay.
Well, one of the most important things for me is to, you don't hold it. So I have a reputation for if it needs to be said, I'm going to say it. And you just say it, and you put it out there, and you deal with it, and then you keep going. I just watched so many times where issues, people just allow them to fester. And you just have to find a way to confront it, because often it's those kind of things that get you held up, and they take your joy because you're tiptoeing around, and it's something essential that needs to be just put on the table and dealt with. And so I try to do that all the time. Second, for me, I try to be as self-reflective as I possibly can. We always think our way is the right way, and I've done everything. And if you get caught in that, then you don't find other solutions. And so I often like to just say, did I handle that right? Could I have handled that better? If there's some kind of way that I could adjust so that I can move something along, because the goal has to be get it done. And so we can't get in the way of ourselves getting things done because we just get all caught up in our own ego about being right or I'm right. And sometimes being right is going to be unproductive because right doesn't always get you to the end. And you know, the last, I would say, or not the last, but a third thing for me is that once I let it go and get it out there, then, you know, in my head, I have to sort of move on to the next place. So sometimes when you're trying to manage something, it can take all your time and it can take all your joy. So the first thing is that you just put it out there and you deal with it. You don't hold it to let it be inside of you, but once you let it go, you really have to let it go. And you know, if I do those three things, I can stay productive. But I often find that if something is gnawing on me and I have not found the way to address it, it can really slow you down. Not just in your work, in your productivity, but I think it really affects your emotional health because it starts to sort of take over. And when stuff wakes you up at night because you're sleeping and you're still trying to manage that program, it's time to find a solution. And often for me, that solution is put it on the table, let's deal with it, and let's move on.
Great.
Well, my parents had this thing that they would do with the girls. We call us the girls. My mother would say, you're someplace, and then my dad would say, and then get with the program. So her whole thing is you're in a place for a purpose. Find out what it is, and my dad would say, get with the program. Don't try to fight it. If you're there and you need to do something productive, think about it and talk to other people, but get it done and get it done well. Don't just be making circles around. All three of us are leaders. All three of the girls are leaders, and it's very interesting. We're also innovators. So my mother was a model about this in her life down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, heading the NAACP. She decided that if people belong to the NAACP, they belong to an organization that promoted civil rights and all that. If they truly believed in it, they should be life members. So they had more life members than they had regular members. She'd go up and accost people. Get out your checkbook. And are you a member of the NAACP? And are you a life member? Well, you need to write it out so you're a life member. Because if you believe in something, then you put your whole self into it. And not a halfway thing. So she even did it with white people who were in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I didn't believe it. My sister told me, I said, what? She said, and she would get away with that. So I was raised in this whole notion of if you believe in something, then you put your whole self into it. And what's more, it's a model that other people will follow you because you feel you have modeled a commitment to something. If you're a halfway leader, don't do a halfway job. If you're not going to do a full job, just don't do it. Don't do it at all. Just let it go. And so that would be the whole thing. And just because you are initially not accepted doesn't mean you walk out. You stay there, figure it out. If you're supposed to be there, you figure it out. You're smart. You have 3 smart girls. Figure it out and get it done. Just get it done and get it done well. If you get it done well, it's really hard to argue with you. So there was a whole thing about quality of work, whatever you did, of doing it well. And the final thing was be nice while you're doing it. Even though people are getting on your last nerve as a leader, be pleasant about it. Because sometimes they're not ready to move where you want them to move. And in psychology, we have this is old school, successive approximations, that old school, get them moving, along the way. And that was the advice in terms of leadership, get them moving. And I guess a part of that is related to our whole family, because you could hear we kept moving in different environments and we had to keep adjusting. Is learn the environment and get with the program in that environment, even if you want to change it, but you have to have allies whenever you want to do something. So we had parents who talked to us a lot at the dinner table. We had wonderful food, but a whole lot of conversation every night.
It's beautiful.
Great. What do you see as psychology's future? What will be the most important challenges in the next 10 or 15 years? And do you have recommendations for future generations of women of color entering the field?
When I started at Howard in experimental psychology, because, experimental for me was just all about methods. And I used to go into this little room next door. Wade Boykin was and continues to be my mentor. And my little lab room in my little white coat was in a room right next to his office. And he would see me coming out, and he was like, when you want to do some real work? And I, would be on, because I was excited. I was doing methodology, and I was doing something like looking at how long it took people to perceive the difference between parallel lines or something like that. I don't even remember now. And then, but for me it was exciting. It was method, and it was all the things that made me excited. And I took a seminar with Wade. It was developmental, but it was all about everything else. It was about, the predicament of African American children and achievement, and reading philosophy and reading almost everything that wasn't even psychology, and just really trying to come up with a different way to think about a problem that I knew all too. That I was all too familiar with, because it was, the problem that I had seen in my own community. And so while I had been fortunate enough, and I would say blessed enough to be successful, I left a lot of people behind in my community who I know were smart and able, but circumstances and so on had not allowed them the opportunity to realize that. And here I was sitting in this class with this man who was on the verge of really pulling that kind of a theoretical understanding together relative to achievement. And it stirred something inside me that was really greater than anything. It was sort of the first time that psychology became really real to me. And then working with him and trying to figure out how to measure these things, because he is also an experimental psychologist by training, it allowed me that piece as well. But, when we started doing work back in the 80s, the kind of concepts that we talked about, culture and how culture really shaped behavior, and how if you figured out how to manipulate that you can affect positive change, there was nothing about that at all in the literature. I remember writing my dissertation and having to sort of really try to pull together a literature review. And there were people, black psychologists, who at different points in time had done things. I could try to make it relevant, but and I wanted to make it relevant because I wanted those people in my work, but nothing ever quite got there. And I read something, well, I didn't read something the other day, but I have a student I had at Winston-Salem State who is now in a doctoral program at NC State. And she put on Facebook a picture of an article she was reading. She was like, when you are reading and see the citation of somebody that you know. So it was some of our work that was cited. And so she flashed and she sort of tagged me on Facebook, and I'm like, I never found that 20 years ago, or however long ago it was. And so, persisting in that and doing research, and then continuing to try to influence that through teaching, to me has made some huge and fundamental changes in psychology. And don't want to be cocky about it, pretty humble about it, but to have been a part of that from a developmental standpoint, to watch culture not being a variable to being, almost one of the most important variables, it has been a great part of being able to contribute to my work. But it's still not enough, because with all we know about pedagogy and the ways in which you can positively affect the performance of students, it's still not embraced at a policy level in the way that can make a difference in the achievement of African American children. And so, I think psychology, back in the day, we pushed all this mainly through AB-Psy. And then we started to get the different divisions within APA that started to pick it up. But, we're not there yet. And so I think, in the next 10 to 15 years, we can't lose sight of the things that have momentum. And the thing that we have now that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago is we have data. And so, just like you said, oh, here's the data. We have some things that have shown positive effects, and I think we have to be better advocates for pushing that from being research to really influencing policy, because I haven't seen a lot of this work affect policy in a way that can make a difference. I think about the work we did with Dr. Arel. We know how bad racism is on the psyche. We got all kind of data. We got, people's blood pressure going up and stroke volumes and so on. Yet we haven't moved it to a policy level where it can really impact the lives of people every day. And so we can't rest just being research psychologists. I think our policy agenda has to really be revved up so that we can now move this stuff from basic research and really doing some more sort of clinical trials on all this kind of stuff, so that we can actually have a real impact, a broader impact, for me on children and education, but health and everything, because Black psychologists and women in particular have made some great discoveries about just how if you turn this question around and you ask it in a different way, you'll get a different response, and it can have impact that's positive. And I just don't think we've used it enough to help people.
I would just simply say that I think I am a piece of the future. I think we all are. But my piece is that I cross professions. I'm a nurse and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I found bridging. I probably bridge more things in my life than that's probably what this primary thing I do is bridging. And I was thinking about a group that I used to meet with when I was in England. I also worked with a group in Paris, and they would meet in Paris twice a year. Not bad meeting in Paris twice a year. So we would meet together, but it would be like psychologists, it would be psychiatrists, it would be artists. And our goal was to fix the world. I mean, how do you get a better goal than that? And I remember just looking so much forward to the meeting that there were going to be these conversations, these courageous dialogues about how to approach the world. And I think that that's what we've got to do more of, is we've got to have these courageous conversations. And they've got to be about racism, and they've got to be about sexism, and they've got to be about just you and me and how we bridge and hold hands together and look both ways and cross the street. Let me stop there.
Oh, that's really great, and I'm sorry to follow you on this one in some ways. But my initiative as APA president is about being a citizen psychologist, and it's about collaboration and working across differences in terms of moving forward. And I do think that psychology has many tools, but it also needs to broaden its perspectives in terms of problem solving. There is not a research study that says why I am sitting here today and why my two sisters have been so successful. Where are those studies? We have enough of a critical mass that we really need to have that information. And when you don't have the information, then people decide it doesn't exist. There's no reason to pursue it. And that's my push. So one is collaboration across differences. Very important that we recognize we're not the only ones with the answer and or with the right questions even, okay. And the second one is studying groups that have been studied primarily from a negative perspective. How about looking at success and providing people with information about that? Since I've been Black probably longer than anyone sitting in this group right here, I've seen so many instances of Black people being successful and they should not have ever been successful. Let's look at that. Let's be positive and let's believe. I believe, I'm still struck on this whole notion, I keep saying in different places, we don't have cures for cancers and other things because we didn't educate everybody.
Yeah.
We decided we only educate some people, and the cause and the cures were with the other people, and so we have to wait longer. Let's educate everybody. Let's figure this out so that people don't have to suffer. For those of us who lost people to cancer, they should not have died so early. So let's do that. That's my parting thing, to come together for the betterment of all, which does not allow for exclusion for certain groups because of race or socioeconomic status.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we've gotten an action agenda going forward. And I want to thank you for sharing your story, and it's been inspiring to me, and I am assuming it's been inspiring to everybody here. And so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.